Hello and welcome to the Chthonia Wednesday live stream. I'm Breach Burke and it is now the 9th of April 2025. Remember to put the date in. Of course, it cut part of my date off when I put it in. Trying to catch up at the last minute. I'm always remembering a week later that I have not scheduled the live stream for the following week. So so today is kind of the all week has been incredibly busy. I've had a lot of stuff going on. For anybody who joins this live stream and is new to the format that I have here, because I have had people, if there's a certain topic, I've had people say, well, you talked about all this other stuff besides the topic. And it's like, yeah, because this is the live stream for my channel and for my podcast. And I'm going to cover, whatever it is that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing. And hello, Joanne. Good to see you. And long time no see. I was just talking with her a couple hours ago. So right now you're the only one. So, but we'll see. More people usually jump on. So So anyway, I was just saying that it's been incredibly busy. And with Chthonia, I feel like I've had hey, hello, good to see you. It's a spiritual goddess who's on. And I have what you call it? It's just been really busy because I don't know if I talked about this on the last live stream. Probably I did, because I think last one was last Wednesday. And I have been teaching a class on information and digital literacy, in addition to my usual myth, religion, and that kind of stuff. So it has been incredibly busy. I think I've got like 90 students right now. And ISFM, of course, as I mentioned, I ended up canceling the courses for this term, but I am going to try to come up with kind of like a summer session of things that might not be like a formal diploma program, but actually something that might actually be a more of a, topics where people can join in. I've seen something like it. I've seen there's a couple folklorists I know who would do something like, Professor's Pints or something, where they would have an online thing where everybody would get together kind of like they were in the pub, and they would have a chat about a particular topic. I won't use that exact concept, but something along those lines of discussing some things that I've really wanted to discuss that I think are germane to the subject of the school. And that might be an easier thing to do this summer, as I am preparing to move. So it's just a very busy time for me right now. So I'm trying not to let Chthonia take a back seat. For those who are on my Patreon, I am going to be doing a special podcast, which I'm going to be recording this evening, on the Egyptian concept of the soul. So people who are at the $5 level and above on Patreon usually will get at least 1 to 2 extra podcasts a month. And of course, I do more updates there, early access to podcasts and things like that. So just going to mention that. And I still do have books for sale. I did launch the new Chthonia website, and I don't know, true to Mercury retrograde kind of stuff. I was looking at it in a couple of different places, and there's just certain things that I had put in place when I set the website up that just don't look right now. Some of the photos that were fine. Then when I look at them like on the phone, or if I look at them on the big screen, they're all like mushed up. So I'm like, all right, I have to go in and do some rework on the photos on this site. Really, the ISFM site needs it too. I need like a whole technological thing that I need to do to get everything up to speed. However, if people do want to buy my books, those links are all up and available and current on the Chthonia.net website, which is, I guess it's been transferred over. The domain's been transferred over, and I had to remember to repay for it and all that kind of stuff. And once I am stop being hugely busy with all the stuff I'm doing right now, trying to prep for classes and stuff, my normal classes are not difficult to teach. But when I have a new class that, again, this is not a hard class to teach, but because I've not done it before, it's like you have to plan every single step of the way. So that's a little bit of a pain in the arse, because then I have to take time, and I have to go in a couple of days a week, and I don't like to drive, as people know, although this university happens to be on my regular route, which is the only reason I agreed to teach it in person. So I have to go there a couple nights a week, and it does end up eating up a lot of my day, even though I'm only there for really, I don't know, maybe 3 hours. But it does seem to take up a lot of my time. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. I just simply wanted to get on and talk a little bit about some of these topics. Now, we did do the Eris podcast last week, and I did talk a little bit about topics connected to that in the last live stream. I can't remember specifically. I feel like I was watching I think it was a Funky Frog Bait video that was talking about, it had something to do with, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what the exact topic was now. Like, my brain's not gonna retain it. But there was some different weirdnesses that it was definitely connected to the archetypal feminine stuff, and I can't remember because I've watched a bunch of those videos now. There is that one has kind of another video from that channel has sort of inspired this one. It's not a direct. I don't want it to make it a direct commentary on that video because it's its own thing, and it's a very good video, and it has to do with wedding vows. And I found it to be quite interesting. There's a number of interesting little subtopics there, and I like the way that they're handled on that channel. I mean, it's funny the way she handles them, or he or they. I don't know the pronoun of the person who's hosting, so I don't want to make any assumptions. But so they are. Yeah, so I don't know specifically, but I do know that the content there is very good. And this one on marriage vows, when I saw this, and this wasn't the only place I saw something, by the way. I have actually saw a couple other videos that kind of ended up in my feed about marriage vows, and things that are connected to our modern institution of marriage. And I thought, there was so much there that kind of generated so much thought in my mind that I thought, yeah, I think this is a good Chthonia podcast topic, because obviously we talk about the dark feminine here. And the dark feminine tends to be more sovereign in its inflection, right? The dark feminine is more about feminine independence or retaining feminine identity to a certain degree, or women not really acceding to the model, what I like to call the Virgin Mary model of things, where the woman is just there to be chaste and obedient and submissive and that kind of stuff. And, not because, conversely, that this woman needs to go out and be like, I'm an effing bitch and I'm out to like, I'm out to like castrate everybody and say, we're not talking about that either. Generally, when we talk about dark feminine, we are talking about what is hidden. And, it can involve that to some degree, in as much as the dark feminine often is connected to feminine anger and feminine sense of betrayal, the way in which women tend to feel disenfranchised as people a lot of the times, because we're not certainly living in a time when women are always treated like they are human beings who should have rights and autonomy and things like that. And so certainly that aspect of it is something that is of interest to a lot of people, the dark feminine, in the sense of I'm going to be empowered. I think I was talking about TikTok last week, right? And the ideas about embracing the feminine or embracing the dark feminine. Now I remember. Yeah. So there's that whole concept. And I understand where people are coming from on that issue. But I think there's a need to kind of step back and think about what our categories of masculine and feminine are, because I can talk about things from the perspective of depth psychology, and obviously I continue to do that. But I think sometimes it's, depending on the age of the people who are watching, depending on the life experience. If I'm talking to, say, undergraduate students who are between 18 and 22 as a general rule, they could be, could be older, potentially. But when you're talking to people like that, and you talk about certain types of experiences, I always ask about what kind of experience they've had, like in private journal entries and stuff that they do. I mean, they don't have to get super personal or anything, but if I mention certain things, I say, oh, okay, well, like if we do something on love mythology, okay, what's your experience of falling in love? If we talk about the underworld, what's your experience? What was your conception of the underworld before this lecture? Was there a specific belief you had? Like things like that, things that kind of tap into where are you at with this topic? Because at a certain age, you're not going to be, you're not going to necessarily be focused on some of these topics in the same way. So yeah, so the idea of marriage, now this is an interesting one because it's changed a lot probably since I was a kid. And Joanne, I know we were talking about this earlier since we were both kids and the kind of images that we had. And I feel like if you are into the astrology, the fact that Venus has been retrograde along with Mercury, I think this is a question that I'm seeing coming up a lot for people because Venus retrograde, whether you believe in the astrology or whether you think it's merely symbolic, there's definitely this idea that we are moving back into this space of questioning relationships and questioning what it means to be in relationship. And certainly the theme I had wanted for the ISFM this particular spring had to do with masculine and feminine energy and how does it get integrated. And it's a topic that I think a lot of people are not terribly interested in right now because there's still this definite split between the way people feel. I don't want to call it the war of the sexes exactly, maybe to some degree, but we definitely see a lot about women who are not willing to accept and tolerate certain modes of being and certain ideas about their role in building relationships that would have been totally acceptable when I was younger. And again, some of it I think is a good change. Other things I'm like, well, we might want to be careful with how far we go with this kind of a change. I feel like I had this conversation Tuesday. Yeah, because we were talking about people who get into couples when you have an age difference. Because nowadays, if there's an age difference of, say, I don't know, it may depend on how old the people are too. Because my friend's son was saying, well, it would depend. Like if there's somebody who's just turned 18 and they're going out with somebody who's like 40, like that seems like it would be developmentally and everything else would seem kind of weird. And okay, so I kind of see the logic in that for sure. But, in my lifetime, I have been involved with people who have been my age, who have been a few years older than me, who have been a few years younger than me, who have been 25 years older than me. I've been involved with kind of, the gamut. And I don't know. I mean, the numbers don't seem to matter as much. I said to my friend the other day, I said, I always somehow feel like I'm still the grown up in the relationship, regardless of how old they are. But it was, and again, this is all past tense because at the moment I'm too busy with other stuff to think about that. But it's, but it's just been, but again, I kind of find myself going back to this idea of relationship, what it means to be in a marriage. There's always the discussion of, well, if you are going to get married. Now, first of all, there's a lot of people who just hate marriage outright. They're like, no, it's a dead institution. It's a dated institution. And, we don't want any part of it. And that, again, is a point of view I can certainly understand with a lot of people. I think when in a culture, too, where people are more open about gender identity, being more gender fluid and things like that with, certain people, then that also they don't want to be kind of put into these rigid categories of, the kind of male-female relationship kind of a thing. And of course, there's, the subject of gay marriage and stuff, too. And, how do these kind of paradigms apply in that milieu as well? Like how is it, how does that affect people? How does that partnering manifest itself when we are in a position where we are not, when we're in a position where we're not, I don't want to put it, where we're not talking about what kind of has always been represented as kind of the normal. I don't like to use the word normal. What has been normal has to do with what kind of was the majority thing for a long time, or what was accepted by the majority. So in that sense, I mean, the word normal I find is just, that's, what the heck does that mean, right? Who's normal? Or what's normal? But the idea of what we think of as traditional, okay? The fact that this is a change from that in a way, but how do these relationship structures that marriage maybe wasn't designed for initially, how does that change? And actually, are human beings really even designed for marriage at all at this point in terms of what its original purpose was? Because marriages often, as I think I mentioned in the last live stream, they tend to be contracts. It tends to be more of it's more of a selling of property in the way that they were initially kind of carried out. The idea of marriage as having anything to do with being with the person that you love is definitely a much later concept. I mean, this is a concept that is connected to chivalry and to things like that. To these, it's something more from the late Middle Ages, that kind of an era where you have the knights in shining armor, and you have all of this, Tristan and Isolde, and you have all this kind of love poetry and so forth, the people who would give their lives for the beloved, and so on and so forth. This is an ideal of love that's come into being, and I think it's something that we connect a little bit more with the idea of marriage now, rather than the idea of the contract. Though we do maintain a lot of the same elements of a contract, as I think I have mentioned it. For instance, if we talk about the man trying to ask the woman for her hand in marriage, right, and that you kind of put a ring on it, right, or or the woman being walked down the aisle by her father, or whoever the male stand-in is for her father. It's like the idea that you are being given away by somebody. And if you think about that, it's like, yes, you're my property, and now you're going to be this guy's property. I mean, that's kind of the thing. My entire family is full of unhappy marriages. My own marriage failed in my mid-20s. I will never get married again. I've lived with my current boyfriend for almost 15 years now. Yeah, and you know what? I can completely understand that. I've also come from a family of many failed marriages. I think there's only one. I guess my parents stayed married for 60 years, and then my father died. So there's that. I mean, how happy that always was is another question. But yeah, I feel you on that. And yeah, I think I left my husband when I was 29. And then I got in my early 30s, and I went to a Vedic astrologer who, and I don't know if this is true in your chart, but in my Vedic chart, I have Mangal dosha. It has to do with the placement of Mars. I think if Mars is in the 4th, 8th, or 12th house or something like that. There might be another placement too that I'm missing. But if it's there, then you should never get married before the age of 30 because you're Mars influenced. And you may be more focused on your career and yourself and so forth, and not so much on the partnership. I have Mangal dosha. It gets canceled by the time you're 30, but nonetheless, like, yeah, if you've had a marriage in your 20s and you've had that, you're just like, whoa, okay. Like, yeah, I have been divorced for, 22 years now. So, yeah, and I've not had any, I've had really, no strong desire to really hook up again. Although I'm kind of at a point where I've said, okay, if it was the right person in the right situation, I could think about it. But it's, but yeah, I completely feel you on that, and I don't blame you at all for saying, like, yeah, I don't think I ever want to do this again. Yeah, because it is kind of a property exchange, and I think the difficulty that we have, and I think the reason a lot of people, I think the reason people still want to get married these days, if they're not coming from this kind of traditional background where that is the thing that you do, right? That's one aspect to why people get married. There could be perfectly legal reasons why people get married too. Like if you have to, the idea of, getting the tax breaks or getting, just certain things that you're only eligible for if you're in a couple. I remember when I was living in Ireland, it was as a single woman being in Ireland, I got a lot of very funny looks from people like, why are you not pushing a pram? Like, who are you to be a woman walking around by yourself? And I think it was, I feel like maybe it was April Shaley who had told me she had different experiences in Ireland when she was there just dating her boyfriend, and another experience after she actually married him. The way she was treated was like vastly different. It was like night and day. So a lot of times it depends. And there's some people, because of, financial reasons or whatever else, they may choose to get married. The other thing though, too, and I think this is kind of the thing that maybe I was addressing, I'm going to address a little bit here, is the idea that it's the image that we're given of marriage when we are teenagers, okay, or even younger than that. Honestly, I think the first conceptions of marriage that I had, I was probably like 5 years old. They have children's books on it. They have things like that. There's the whole idea of the bride, okay, and the bride is there's kind of an archetype almost of the bride, so she is it's like a fairy tale kind of a thing. That you're going to have the long white dress, and you're going to have the big, wherever you're going to have it. If you're a Christian, I guess in the big cathedral, or you're going to have it in, whatever, faith space you have for your organization, you're going to be in that space. and there's going to be all the people, and there's going to be the big reception, and there's going to be all the stuff that goes with it, the showers and the bachelorette party and this and that, and all the things that are supposed to go along with it. And it's very interesting to notice the psychology of that, because you will have two people will get engaged and they will say like, oh no, we just want a small wedding. We are not making a big deal out of this. I mean, yes, I want to have a bridal party. I want to have this. I want to have that. But, we're going to keep it small. And then inevitably what happens is everything suddenly starts to snowball. I know this happened to a friend of mine who was asked to be a maid of honor in somebody's wedding. And this ruins friendships too, by the way. This can ruin friendships. You have somebody who, you pick somebody to be their maid of honor, and then it's like, oh, okay. Well, now, first it's just going to be the simple thing. Now it's, we're all going to go to a hotel, and now we're all going to have, a spa day, and we're all going to have this, and we're all going to have that. And the dresses, which maybe started as one thing, now have become something else that's maybe doubly expensive. And maybe it's like, okay, we only need you to come to 1 or 2 fittings. Well, now you have to be available every week, because now we're going to do this thing and we're going to add this thing on. And the whole thing blows up. I think they call it bridezilla syndrome, where the bride just suddenly just gets out of control with needing this perfect fairy tale kind of party. And yeah, in this particular case, my friend was just like, she's like, no, I'm not going to be in this bridal party. She ended up having some kind of excuse to not be in it, but she never spoke to that friend ever again, because she was just like, it just ruins the friendship, because we're too attached to this Cinderella idea of marriage, right? You're going to marry your prince. And this is what I consider to be a direct problem. Now, okay, maybe today, again, we may be living in a time where young women look at things differently now. There's a different cultural expectation, but there are certainly certain parts of certain communities within our culture that still accede to that idea. And what ends up happening is the women feel like they have to, there's just this whole thing that starts from the time you're a teenager, from the time you hit menarche, and the first time that you may feel physically attracted to someone. Okay, because that's how everything starts. You have that physical attraction. And again, judging from the experiences of my students, from what they've told me in their writings to me, some of them, it's amazing. Like some of them are like 20 and they've said, oh, I don't know if I've ever fallen in love, which to me is interesting, but people may be defining love in a different way. And they may be feeling like that being in love is more about, it's not about that, first, glint in your eyes, and they may see it as something a little more serious and more substantial, which I think is actually healthy. But we all have that experience of that pull, that attraction to somebody, even if it's somebody who's not accessible. You see how many people are attracted to celebrities, for example, right? And when you have these kinds of attractions, there's something where people, where people have these kinds of fantasies. And I think women in particular, there's always kind of been this idea, because women have been kind of conditioned to think that, what completes her is having a partner. And of course, in that era, certainly having a man would be the partner, right? Having the man who's going to provide for you. Even if we go back to your Jane Austen or your, Emily Bronte and your things like that, it's the idea of, we got to find, eligible men for our daughters, right? There's still this kind of idea that one of the things that determines your success as an adult, as a female, is who you're partnered with, and whether or not you have, whether or not you've put a ring on it. And that's really, I go back and I look at, old commercials. I look at old TV shows. I look at old things that maybe were around when I was a kid that would influence me as a kid. And I'm like, damn, this does create a certain impression of marriage that is just not realistic. And like everything else, like there's no preparation for sex. There's no preparation. And sex ed is not enough of a preparation. I mean, maybe some people are going to be fortunate enough to have, a better experience with that. But typically speaking, adolescence is a very awkward and, where you're just basically potentially going into one calamity after another. I do feel like parents today tend to keep kids hemmed in a little bit more, which I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a parent, so I can't comment on whether that's better or not. My landlord's husband just verbally attacked me over parking. Oh my goodness. That's not good. Jeez. Joanne's not having a great day with all this stuff. So I'm sorry to hear that. So yeah, so when you have this kind of marriage situation, it's, I don't know. Yeah, it's very much, we don't, okay. We go into the whole thing thinking that marriage is supposed to be like a Cinderella thing, like one big happy romance. And anybody who's been married already knows that that's just absolutely not the case. I mean, the divorce rate's really, really high. It's been at least 50%, 50 to 51% for years. And to me, it's because nobody has any absolute preparation for going into this. And we still have the fundamental problems of how the masculine and feminine are interpreted in our culture and how they connect. Okay. So so going back to marriage vows, this is where I was starting. So I actually pulled up for myself the traditional marriage vows, and I'm just gonna read what they are. These are the traditional Protestant Christian marriage vows. I realize in other cultures and situations, the vows may be totally different, but these are the ones you tend to see in popular culture, at least here. And the way they go is, in the name of God, I, enter name here, take you, enter name here, to be my husband or wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until, death do us part. Okay. So those are the vows. Those are the marriage vows. And, so there's this idea that, first of all, these are vows that are supposed to be taken before God. Okay. If you happen to be a religious person, if you're not, maybe you're not going to have that. When I had been married back in the 90s, I seem to recall that my then spouse and I had written our own vows, and I have no clue what we said anymore. Obviously, they're irrelevant at this point because we just said, yeah, never mind. I don't think they were, there was no till death do us part. And there was, let's see, for better, for worse, rich or poor, sickness, health, to love and to cherish. And there used to be a section in there too that I've noticed is not in this one, that Bride Magazine no longer mentions, which is to honor and to obey. Okay. And typically this was something that the woman would say in particular. I don't know if the man had to say that to the woman or not. It might be honor and I don't know, something else. That's something I can't quite recall, but I kind of almost had this idea that I feel like that this was part of the women's traditional marriage vows, that, you were going to, and I understand in sickness and in health, for rich or for poor, because the idea is if you are going to make this commitment to another person, then that commitment is something, it's not just like, oh yeah, I'm bored with this, so I'm going to walk away this week. Especially if you have children involved, especially if you have other situations like this. So, yeah. So it really, it really can vary. Okay, in the way that this, is done. So, so when you actually are in a marriage with somebody, you are not somebody who is, this is not supposed to be a casual relationship. This is not just like, yeah, we need to talk. I've decided we're going to break up. Like breaking up is not supposed to be something done lightly. And if you take this within the context of religion, they of course see it this as some kind of a bond created, like a spiritual bond that's created. Right? Now, if you practice Wicca, they have the whole concept of the marriage for a year and a day. And again, legally, I don't know how that works, because there's religious marriage, and then there's the marriage that, the civil marriage, the one, the paperwork that you sign legally that allows a woman to say, if she wants to change her name to her spouse's name, but which again is kind of a thing that people maybe don't do as much now, because the idea is almost that you, with changing your name, become like the property of the spouse. Right? So, okay, so we know all of the things about the institution of marriage and how generally people are just generally unready for it. I don't know. I mean, some people are very fortunate. They will happen to meet somebody who will be a great match for them, and they are actually able to weather things and do the richer or poorer thing, and be able to see each other through all the ugly times, because there's always plenty of ugly times. I don't like to be negative, but that's the reality. Whatever the honeymoon period is of a marriage, if you have one. I never had one. I hated him right from the moment I walked away from the aisle. I was like, yeah. And if you're wondering, you're probably going, well, then why did you marry him, you idiot? Well, because I'm Taurian. I'm incredibly stubborn, and I just felt like we had a very good relationship before. My gut instinct was screaming at me, like, do not do this. Do not do this. I had teachers I knew and stuff going, you're 22. Are you sure you want to do this? And of course, I felt, well, I'm 22. I mean, most of my siblings had been married at 20. My mother had gotten married at 24. But it was like, there was this idea that, like, well, of course. I mean, you're getting to be an old maid. You need to get married, right? And even though I was I just finished undergrad. I'd been over in England. I graduated, with honors. I had all this stuff. Finishing up school was kind of depressing at that point. Getting my college degree, and then basically having this marriage, which neither one of us, which was completely unconscious. Jung talks about the idea. He has a whole essay called "Marriage as a Conscious Relationship." And I make my mythology students read this in connection with the Eros and Psyche myth, because it has a lot to do with, because Eros and Psyche is the perfect demonstration of the unconscious marriage that needs to become conscious. Because Psyche, when she is taken away by the monster who she is supposed to marry, who is actually Eros or Cupid, who accidentally wounds himself with his own arrow. There's a lot of that in Greek mythology, like, whoops, I accidentally hit myself. And he falls in love with her. So his mother tells him that to take her away and have her fall in love with the monster. But instead, and some people would argue that Eros is the monster in this case, but he scoops her up and takes her away to this palace where there's all these invisible people, and he only comes to her at night, and she can't see him. But he's so sweet and so loving. But that's a very lonely existence. She's there, and there's nobody really there to talk to. There's just all these invisible voices. It's being in the unconscious. It's being in this land of shadows, of things that are not concrete, not conscious, not real, in the sense of really being grounded in this world. So she, when the sisters come, Eros doesn't want the sisters to come. And everybody thinks, oh, the sisters are bad. They were jealous, and they didn't like everything she had, so they were going to try to ruin it for her. And my students will frequently say this to me too. And I'm like, no, actually, they didn't. They came in to say to her, wait a minute, hang on, didn't they say you were supposed to be married to a monster? Like, maybe this guy's just being real nice to you and he's setting you up for something, like maybe you should get him before he gets you. And of course, now she's freaked out. She goes, oh man, I didn't even think about that. So she goes in with the lamp and the knife, and which is incredibly symbolic of the whole motif of cutting one, the hero cutting themselves out of the belly of the whale, kind of motif, cutting yourself out of the unconscious space, lighting the way. And that's why Hecate, by the way, is such a strong, dark, feminine figure, because she lights the way in that darkness, showing you what's real. And she accidentally spills wax on him. He wakes up. He's angry. He feels betrayed because she didn't keep it a secret, and he leaves. But at this point, she's seen him. Now she's seen him, and now she has a basis for real love, whereas before she did not. Now she gets put through all this torment because he basically is behaving like a man-child. But I always point to the fact that mythology is less about real human relationships in a very literal sense than we tend to think. Like, we evaluate the marriage of Zeus and Hera, and in a way, we try to compare it to human marriages, but there's certain aspects of it that are not really comparable, even though we try. So this is the kind of thing. And then Aphrodite puts her through all of this. It goes the tortures of love, right? It's all the things that people go through. And then in the end, they reunite because now Eros has now seen her as a real person. And it's not just in this kind of amorphous fantasy place. But a lot of people will read that story and go, oh, but, she should not have, she should have just obeyed him. She should not have tried to see who he really was. But when a man does not, speaking cisgender, heterosexual people, if you're a woman and you're a man lives in this kind of thing where you're not allowed to see who he really is, that's something to worry about. You're not, there's no basis, because then you just become bear the brunt of that person's projections. And then when you don't live up to them, you're just going to get dumped, because nobody can live up to anybody's projections long term. I mean, that's just kind of a psychological fact. But okay, I keep circling around this, but let's get back to wedding vows. So wedding vows. Okay, so I just talked about the traditional wedding vows. The idea there is that you are talking about a level of seriousness that it is supposed to be conscious. Part of the reason that you're supposed to go through premarital counseling or training is the idea that you are prepared for what you're really getting into. And whether it really does that or not, I don't know. Because I see these videos, and also I've been to a lot of weddings too for people. I've been to weddings, I've seen people, and it's very interesting what I see in a lot of relationships, even couples who I know who have been together for years. Okay. There's this kind of thing, especially if they're going to, even if they're doing the traditional vows, there's always a kind of joking factor, particularly on the part of the guy. And what they do, so the example that I had seen in this one video, this was apparently something that went viral on TikTok. It was somebody's marriage vows. And I remember her, she had kind of like purple hair and she was wearing long, she looked, attractive. She looked pretty. She had this really long hair. And I think he was wearing a kilt or something. And all of his marriage vows were about, it came down to, as long as you learn how to cook properly and satisfy me in the bedroom, and gotten to great detail about what he would do in the bedroom in his wedding vows in front of an official and in front of everybody. And as long as, I forget who he was, I forget who it was. There was some woman, he was like, oh, but if she ever propositions me, I'm out, I'm dumping you and I'm out. This is what his marriage vows said. Now, her marriage vows, by contrast, were more about, they already had a couple kids together, so it was about us and we're going to build together. But at the same time, she was saying well, I know I'm not a model, and I know I'm not great at this, and I know I'm not great at that. And you're going, now, according to her later on, because a lot of people were like, red flags, red flags. She came back later and said, oh, no, we've been together 10 years. Everything's fine, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but why is that like that? And she showed several examples of this. Weddings, and I have been to weddings like this. Cringy. Well, I know, exactly. Very cringy. But I have been to weddings like that, or where the groom's sitting there kicking his friends oh, you better help me. Now I've got the old ball and chain. If you're going in there and the whole thing, now sometimes people do it because they're nervous, okay? I get that sometimes, men, because they don't know really how to deal with those kind of emotions, are just they're trying to make a joke out of it. But when you've written vows that way, I don't really take this seriously. It's just kind of yeah, yeah, bitch, just, make sure you know how to cook and give me sex when I want it. And, and that's all I kept talking about. What are we going to do tonight at the end of the night? And it's I would punch that guy in the face and walk away. I'd be like, fuck you. I'm not getting married to you. Sorry, I shouldn't say it on YouTube. But that's what I'd be like. I'd be like, because there's no to me. Okay, even though the bride says, oh, no, everything's fine. I'm like, there's no respect in that marriage. Okay, there's no respect in that marriage, or very little. It's not the fact that you could stand on the altar and say something like that you could stand there and say to the woman you are supposed to be making a commitment to, these are the conditions you have to meet, and if I find a better looking woman, I'm going to leave. No, then don't get married. Don't do it. Don't do it for the sake of the kids. And what kind of example are you setting for your kids? This is This is the same, like you said, cringy kind of script that says the way the guy has to kind of make it like, like marriage to him is somehow like an emasculation or something, like to be married and to show romantic love during a marriage. I guess let's put it that way. If he sits there and, and I mean, and to be fair, I have seen grooms who have stood there and cried and, it does happen. But everybody's kind of like, the friends are picking on them and this and that. And it becomes kind of a joke. If you think about what the bachelor parties usually are. Now, I know they have bachelorette parties now as well, but it's often, sometimes it's an affair that could potentially bust up the marriage before it even happens, right? There's this attitude of he's somehow losing his freedom. He's somehow giving up his sovereignty to the woman. So he has to make it clear that he's still retaining his sovereignty. And she's the one who needs to be serving him. And that's something I'm like, this is literally every reason why you don't get married. Unless you're basically selling yourself to an institution of slavery, because then you're just there for two functions. Well, basically you're there for one. You're there to satisfy physical needs. And if you have any self-respect as a human being, then that's not an acceptable set of circumstances. That doesn't mean you might not be a domestic person who doesn't like to cook. That doesn't mean that you might not enjoy your time in the bedroom. It doesn't mean that, you can't have those things. But if that's the basis of your relationship, and you have somebody who's basically standing there going, almost like this is a joke to them. I'm just doing this because this is the thing. This is the right thing to do, or this is the duty that you have. And to me, when I see things like this, and again, I have seen other cases of this, or I think the other thing that was being talked about was when the cake cutting, right? There's always that big thing with the cake cutting where like they have to smash the cake into each other's face or something, or one of them will do it the right way and then the other one has to do this. And some of them are just really violent. Like one, he literally took the girl, like pushed her on the floor and like smacked her one. It was like, whoa, And as it was pointed out, if a bride actually does go the whole Bridezilla route and has the $500 makeup job done, she's not going to be too happy about having stuff, smashed into her face. What is that all about? I mean, it's like, I don't know. There's something about the whole thing where I feel like there's a way, I don't know. It almost seems to be a way there of letting the woman know that now that you have the title of wife, you have a specific place. Some people will say, and I've had friends who say to me, oh yeah, once we got married, it was just like we were dating. It's just a continuation. Well, you're pretty fortunate then, maybe, depending on what your dating life was like. But I have seen a lot of cases where as soon as somebody gets married, the whole thing shifts. And now the man turns into a different person because now you are somebody who is threatening his sovereignty and therefore his masculinity, because he's not going to be the one who's going to be whipped by the little woman, right? You're going to know your place. I think I've told this story before, but it's been a while, so I guess I'll tell it again. I used to go to a restaurant for breakfast that was fairly local to here. And there was a waitress there who I used to talk to. She was there in the mornings, and she was a sweet old lady. She was really nice. We would talk. And she had told me about her daughter, and she said her daughter had just gotten remarried after this first marriage to this other guy. Now, the first guy's name was Charlie, okay? And, nobody knows who this person is, so I think I can safe saying that. But her daughter had lived with Charlie for 15 years. It's funny you kind of said 15 years, but they had lived together 15 years, and I guess it was her house that she owned, and they decided, oh, well, we're just gonna go ahead and get married. We're gonna get married now because, we've been together this long, let's just make it official. There's a lot of people who will do that. And yeah, and I remember this waitress telling me, she says, yeah, so they got married. Now, mind you, they've been living together 15 years. And the morning after their wedding, he comes downstairs and she's in, I don't know, getting breakfast or whatever, getting her coffee. And he says, okay, well, now that you're my wife, and by the way, everything I'm about to say, he was not saying as a joke. Okay, I expect my breakfast on the table at 8 o'clock. I expect my shirts ironed, I expect, yeah, and he kind of went to this long laundry list of, now you're the wife, and this is what I expect of you. And very rightly, she took all of his crap, threw it outside, and get the F out of my house. And they were divorced within 30 days. Because, and you think about that, you've lived with someone for 15 years. How do they change like that overnight? How does that happen? Now, I've always theorized that a lot of this has to do with the archetypes of the way in which the mother-father archetype interacts with the anima-animus archetypes. Because typically, okay, if we're younger people, our image of a married couple is going to be our parents. Okay, if assuming our parents are married. Now, I realize we live in a world today where, there are a lot of single parent families. There may be, gay couples who are parenting. There may be, there's all, it's not just the way that everybody always kind of said, the man and the woman having the kids kind of thing. It's not always like that. Like parents are not always just what, the mother and the father, and they're not always both the natural mother and father either. So understanding all of that. But you frequently will have, they're typically speaking, if we want to get into, psychoanalysis ways of thinking about things, even back to Freud, you have this idea that you have this image of the parents. Okay. Now, whether you believe in the Oedipus complex or not, which is, that's a whole separate subject. But there is a truth to the Oedipal complex, but not the direct truth that people think it is. It's not like, no, you have a little boy who's literally in love with his mom and wants to kill his dad. Like that's not, people take that way too literally and go, kids don't do that. No, they don't. But there is some kind of weirdness there. But if you have been in a family where you've had a male and female parent, okay, or whatever you've had, whatever your situation is, that's going to be your impression of what a marriage looks like. If you have been in a situation where you have had parents who are married, that's where you're going to project the image of mother and father archetype. Now, if not in a traditional family, whoever is the stand-in for those figures, whoever you tend to recognize as a mother figure to you, whoever you tend to recognize as a father figure to you, these are going to be your first understandings of how the masculine and feminine work together in a social setting, in people, not the way, again, this is an archetype that is projected. It's not something that we're consciously aware that we do. Nobody's consciously aware of it, but that image is there. And oftentimes our parents will be judged to the degree that they live up to that archetype, okay, or what our perception is of that archetype. So when you become an adolescent, now or when you become of an age where you are more sexually mature or active, okay, and you may say adolescence is not a state of maturity, but it's not so much about them being mature in like an emotional sense, just that physically the body is maturing in a way that it is capable of reproduction and things like that. There's the definite shift from the childhood body to the adolescent body. So once you've moved into this space and once sexual attraction becomes a thing, then it's like now we're shifting into the archetypes of the soul, which again, being that they have a masculine and feminine component, to a certain degree, they do have their origins in the mother-father archetype because they have to do with how we connect with people. Sometimes you'll hear that somebody will marry somebody who's like, a guy will marry a woman like his mother, or a woman will marry a guy who's like her father. Like you'll hear things like that. Now that's anecdotal really, but it's been around enough to be kind of I don't know, you could call it a tale, but there's this idea here that, because again, part of the construction of what you're looking for in your ideal is also going to have to do with your ideal of that mother-father image. Now, one of the problems with marriage, though, is that women in particular, when you cast a married couple in the role of mother-father, because the assumption is, and again, this does not always happen, right? People get married and then they have children together, right? So we're married and now we have children. So now that couple is going to take on the role of mother-father. Again, it's not a foregone conclusion. Certainly, I never had any children. thankfully, but it's not a, but there's kind of this assumption there. So, so yeah, so it's almost like now you're going to assume this mom and dad kind of role. However, even in a relationship where there are no children, what frequently happens is that the I didn't want kids either. Oh, no, thank you. Is what? Yeah, no, yeah, no, I can't. I'm going to create for the world in different ways, and it's not going to be through reproduction. Yeah, I can't even. I don't even imagine. I mean, I don't know. I don't hate children by any stretch, but I'm also kind of like, I don't imagine why anybody would want to have them. And I know plenty of people who have them, and people always go in and go, no, I have kids, it's great. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, personally speaking, I don't get it. I can't imagine having them. But what tends to happen in a marriage anyway is that, like, especially when I was talking about with these kinds of vows, there's the implication there that the new wife, that the one who was the girlfriend and is now the wife, is now going to become the mom, regardless of whether there's any kids. There's the implication there that you're there to do the domestic work. You're there, for, I don't know, you're there for your husband's pleasure, for some, to some degree. There's a sense of that. Now, again, some people will say, oh, well, I'm married and that's not the way our relationship is. Well, I would hope not, to be honest. I would hope not. But there's enough of it that I see out there. Like I said, I see people who've dated, who've gotten along perfectly well. And as soon as they move into this dynamic, whatever the mother-father relationship was gets projected onto the marriage. The marriage becomes, to some degree, how you've consciously been able to negotiate what you grew up with and how well you understand it is going to determine whether or not, maybe let's just say if there were difficulties in your parents' relationship, whether or not you're going to be running through the same kinds of cycles. And sometimes, even if you are conscious, maybe even if you've gone through therapy, or maybe if you've, I don't know, just done work to acknowledge what's gone before, that still doesn't necessarily save you from that. It doesn't still necessarily save you from that, because there are always things to be uncovered that, until you're in the throes of the situation, that you don't realize. Now, mind you, having said all of this, there is still a potential, even in such a marriage, if both people are awake, aware, and willing to learn from conflict, or learn from the mistakes of the past, or not repeating the patterns of the past, could potentially blossom into a good relationship. But that assumes that both people are aware, understanding, and want to put the work in. Because fundamentally, yeah, I don't think anybody goes into these relationships perfectly adjusted and perfectly well suited to this kind of a life. But by the same token, if you're not, if you're really deeply unaware, that's why I think it used to be a foregone conclusion that, like, you would graduate high school and then you would get married, right? You were married by the time, like I said, both my sisters were married by the time they were 20, 21. And that was almost the thing. Like, that was what you were supposed to do. But but I think now there's an advocacy for older marriages, if people are going to get married, to have an older marriage, because you would hope that with some years of experience, with years of maybe being in and out of different relationships, that you come to a point that you know yourself better and that you know what you want. I talk a lot on my other live stream about, because a lot of people will talk to me about the insecurities in people, or the way that people will interact, and the way in which people feel they have to dominate other people or conquer other people, or kind of get into this sphere where they are, where it becomes, becomes a competition or a battle with other people. And the question is, why? Why can we not all just live and let people do their thing, and so on and so forth? But I said a lot of the answer to that has to do with us being unconscious of who we are. Because once you reach a point that you have had enough life experience, you have confronted enough trauma, you've had enough things happen to you, and you've developed enough empathy around situations where you don't misunderstand the motives of other people, where you don't, where you're able to. I think one of the big tests is if you're able to, when you're criticized, how well are you able to stand in who you are without letting that completely, like, shatter and destroy you, right? How strongly do you stand in yourself? Because if you can stand in yourself and have that kind of, okay, other people can, say and do what they want, but I'm still me in this, and I know who I am, and I know where I'm flexible and willing to learn, and where things aren't negotiable. When you're younger, you're still not at an age where you have figured all of that out yet. As smart as that person may be, as emotionally mature as that person may be, even if that person has all the right attitudes, and ideas about what they're heading into, it can still be a disaster. I remember my nephew's first marriage. He married this woman who was, she seemed okay, but then it was like, and he was quite young. He was like 23 the first time he got married. We were all like, but again, you don't tell people what to do. That's something else I've learned. Don't ever tell people what to do with that. People tried to tell me, and I was like, you're not going to tell me. I know what I'm doing. Yeah. In any case, now I look back and I go, yeah, they were actually right, but I would never have acknowledged it at the time. And, but I remember meeting her parents, and I remember meeting her mother. And when we met the mother, we were like, oh no, this marriage is in trouble. It's in trouble right off the bat, because this woman was, I should be careful about what I describe on a lot, but she was a piece of work. And boy, did was she domineering, was she aggressive, and boy, did she think who she was. And and it turned out over time that her daughter, probably the acorn didn't fall very far from the tree, which unfortunately can happen. So so that marriage did not last. And but I remember when he called up to say that he was getting divorced, I was just like, yeah, okay. And he's like, why am I calling everybody? And everybody's just acting like, yeah, sure, man, okay, like nobody's like, what? Oh my God. Like nobody, I'm like, nobody was surprised by this. And I said, look, and he's like, well, why didn't anybody tell me? I'm like, do you want other people telling you what to do with your life? If you've made that decision, who's here to tell you? And yeah, it was not a good situation. And fortunately, they did not have any kids together. But just there's, he's gotten remarried since then, and things are going significantly better in this marriage than they did in the first one, mainly because, there's a lot of reasons. I think that's another thing people talk about too, is they'll say, oh, well, you really have to know somebody first, or this or that. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that there's a rule around that if you're marrying for love. It's like there has to be the right combination of maturity, commitment, wanting the same things, and potentially knowing each other. If I use my own parents as an example, they both worked for the same place. They met at an office party. And my dad came over and asked my mom for a date. My dad was divorced, by the way. He had already had a marriage, and he had, my half brother. And I think he was just looking for somebody to get married to take care of his son, to be quite honest. And so he asked my mom out for a date, and I think they went out for 6 weeks. And he went to Littman's. He bought her a wedding engagement ring set. He hands her the engagement ring, and he's like, "Oh yeah." He says, "I'll give you the other one when we get married." That was how romantic my engagement was. My English father. It was just not. That was it. And then 3 months later, they got married, and they were married for 60 years. So, and I guess I don't know whether I consider them to have an ideal marriage, but they managed, they more or less for the most part wanted the same things. As they got older, it got, I don't know. I don't want to get into that, but I look at it as an adult in a different way that I would have looked at it as a kid. So point being is that they didn't know each other very long, and their marriage lasted for 60 years. And then you have like the waitress that I knew, whose daughter lived with a guy for 15 years, married him, and it didn't last 30 days. So yeah, I think there's a big problem that we have with the problem is, okay, the way in which we approach relationships, the way in which we approach sexuality, the way that you have people going from childhood into adolescence. Now, going into adolescence doesn't mean like, okay, now we've got to ready everybody for marriage, but because not everybody wants to get married. But you do want to, you need to, people need some kind of, somehow people need to be kind of mentored along in some way. We're not a society that really has significant rite of passage rituals. So there's got to be a way of, getting people conscious of what it is that they're getting into without using the scare tactics of, you'd better not have sex or else. Most teenagers I know have had sex. I mean, I don't know, maybe I can't speak to anybody's, kids or anything now, but it's just something that happens. Sneaking around behind people's parents' backs is a thing that happens. It happens. And I think a lot of it too, I mean, again, it's kind of its own rite of passage, the way in which people try to kind of invent their own when one doesn't exist. But marriage is a kind of rite of passage of which people don't understand the archetypal significance of what they're getting into. And when they're going to get into it and they're going to take it, they're going to treat the ceremony and everything else like it's a joke. I'm like, what you're getting into, whether you choose to have kids or not, is no joke. And you don't take that step unless you're really both sure that this is that you know what you're doing, or at least even if you figured you don't know all of what you're doing, that you're still ready to say, okay, well, even if I don't have all of this right, I'm still willing to do the work. If you're not, then it's not as necessary as people seem to think. And certainly, and again, I don't know that this is a perception in the modern world, but certainly it's not like when I was a kid where that's what defines you as a woman, is who your man is. Okay, that you're not defined by your partner. And yeah, it's not about that. And by the way, the whole soul projection image, I also think about the people who get married. Like, you look at celebrities. You take somebody who's really a woman, who's an actress, who's really beautiful and makes a ton of money and is really famous and has been in a lot of films, and she'll have a husband, and then you find out the husband's running around cheating on her. Well, and to my point that nobody lives up to that image. Or again, there's this idea that the woman, because in some way, by being extremely beautiful and extremely accomplished, is somehow making him feel emasculated or small. So the only way he feels he can regain his sovereignty in the face of this woman who is all these things is to go run around with another woman. You know what I mean? It's the way in which men do not, okay, we'll say heterosexual cisgender men do not have control of the anima. They don't have control of their soul and their soul projection. So it's quite a big thing. It's a bigger thing than we think. I mean, in a world where people maybe aren't getting married as often, who knows? But people still are getting married and kind of falling into the trap of, wanting to live the fairy tale. So this is why I bring it up, because I think regardless of what your background is, whether you're traditional, non-traditional, you need to be very aware of that if you don't want to have an entire lifetime of being unhappy and then maybe having kids and trapping them also in a cycle that is very unhappy. So that's it for me today. This is kind of maybe not the best time for people today because we only had a couple people on and it looks like maybe everybody's off by now. But anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. Obviously, if some of you are watching this in repeat, I will have it. Obviously, there's a recording that's going to be on YouTube, so maybe you'll go back and watch it retrospectively. Hope you enjoy it. And thank you for those of you who did join me today and those of you who end up checking this out later. And I will see you maybe next Wednesday. I don't know. Thanks. Perfect topic. Oh, this is great. Perfect. Okay. Oh, thank you, Joanne. Okay, so good. So you're still here. Just it says 0, but I guess maybe you guys are still here. And yeah, next Wednesday I might be not around, so I may or may not do it next week. But if not, I will be back either a different day next week or I will be back the following Wednesday. So Everybody have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.